We're in the computer. Oh, I should, I'll trim this part. I should ask. Actually, let me pause it. Guys, Sengstock, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, so it's great to see you and to talk to you, and I'm really excited about this because I learned just a little bit about circling, this new kind of therapy I think that you've invented, and it's incredibly intriguing, especially because I work in addiction treatment, and it seems completely the opposite of what they do in rehab, where
Hmm.
I mean maybe I'm wrong, but I mean people, we're told to look at our character defects and what is it, defects and what's the other one? Just people are kind of anonymous, and we're just a number. Basically, you're anonymous. You're not supposed to have an identity. You're you're bad. You've done something wrong. It's a moral thing. Although they've come around a lot in addiction treatment. To say it's a disease. It's not a moral shortcoming. That's the word I was trying to
Yeah,
think of. Shortcoming. Um,
yeah,
but I feel like there's just a person with an illness. We don't go to other people with illnesses, like when someone breaks their leg or they have heart disease or diabetes, we don't go and shame them and say, this is your fault. Look what you've done to yourself. Um,
yeah.
and then I saw some of the circling videos and I heard about it and I'm like, this is like, seems like it's about treating people with respect and, really
Mm.
looking at someone and seeing them, for the beautiful person that they are. And, I'm not sure I totally understand it, but I really want to learn more about it. So yeah, can you tell us more about it?
Oh yeah, totally. Well, it's funny. I'm still learning about it. I would say that's really been my, if there's a fundamental relationship I have with circling, and I was at the first one that happened kind of spontaneously. Something circling kind of just emerged with in a with a group of friends that I was in, and particularly me and my best friend Jerry Candelaria kind of caught sight of that there's something going on here that feels deep and distinct from all the other deep things that we were kind of participating at the time. And kind of Kim and I really kind of came together, you could say, to and committed to bringing it out, whatever that was. And so it's circling didn't I think it's really important to get about circling. Circling isn't something that, you know, anybody kind of invented or kind of came up with on their own, or it was really in the process of being in relationship, and that circling kind of opened up. And I remember when we Jerry and I kind of had this moment after the first time that circling kind of happened. We both like looked at each other and we pointed back to where we just were, where it happened, and we just kind of spontaneously shook our hands on it. We didn't have a name for it. We didn't really even know exactly what we were pointing to, other than that there was a real profound experience that we had. Um, and I would say that my experience has been as I've been discovering what we were pointing our fingers towards ever since. And so there seems to be something there seems to be something about relationship that is just inherently, or can be, right, inherently mysterious. And I think what you kind of pointed to is maybe one of the things that you recognized in some of the videos and things that you've been checking out about circling. And it's funny because I could hear you. It's hard to put your finger on exactly what it is that you're perceiving. Um, I think that tells me that you're actually kind of seeing the thing, right? Which is that there is a way that we can relate with one another where you I you can start to disclose a certain kind of inexhaustibility, right? Something about you is bottomless. Something about you is defies definition. Something about you animates, you could say very, very deep things that are difficult to put into words, that are, in some sense, have the characteristic of being something like ultimately good. And I would say that sense of goodness, that sense of that sense of some would call it like an experience of innocence, that sense of who someone is at the deepest level of their being, right, is a mystery, even to themselves, right? And that whatever that mystery is seems to be something like what gives us dignity. And so a lot of circling is about profoundly relating with somebody's and deeply respecting and seeing someone's inherent dignity. And so that really kind of comes across in the practice of circling, which has a lot to do with not doing what some of the things that I heard you talk about, like in your description of some of the work around addiction, which is, not, it's like not shaming people, like not assuming that I not looking at you as a problem to solve or something to fix or something to manage or something to define, but kind of in some sense being able to relate with you in such a way that I can see and relate with, a something beyond what I can define.
Yeah. Yeah. And that what you just said, a person not being a problem to be fixed. That's something I had heard someone else say at one point, and almost seems revolutionary that, and I don't know if this is saying the same thing, but a person looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, maybe there's nothing wrong with me. Maybe I'm fine just the way I am right now. And it's, you almost are afraid to say that to other people because they're like, well, hold on a second, you're not perfect. I can give you a whole list of things you need to work on. But or is it maybe the world isn't ready for I mean, everybody, wherever they are with whether it's a mental health issue or like a unique characteristic, they could be that one thing the world needs right now. Suddenly the world changes, and like, there was like a scene I brought up before that I just loved, and there was a show, Fear the Walking Dead, and the guy was a heroin addict, and this other guy says, you're exactly what I need. You're the person I want with me because I want you with me more than anybody else because of what a heroin addict is capable of. And in this post-apocalyptic world where zombies have taken over and everybody's dying, you're the person I want next to me more than anybody. And nobody else would have told that guy that ever before in his life. Up until that point, he was told, you're a loser, you're an addict. Nobody wants to be around you. But they say that with a lot of conditions, like I think like things like autism, things like ADHD, maybe in the right place in history, in the right, you're exactly what we need. They say the explorers and the frontier were people with attention deficit disorder, and that was exactly what was needed. But yeah, I mean, would you agree with that? That maybe possible that we're not all people that need work, and that we have problems that, I could probably lose some weight. There's some things I could work on, but on the other hand, maybe I'm fine just the way I am right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's somebody who I think brings language to this that makes a lot of sense to me is the Jewish philosopher theologian Martin Buber, and he has a way of speaking about it that I've really come to appreciate. And he says, he looks at the way he talks about the world is like, and being human being is to always be in a relationship. Like we're a relationship all the way down. We're a relationship in every moment with ourselves, right? With the world, with other people, with our thoughts, with our feelings, right? In other words, he really kind of gets at the sense of that you will never be able to locate the thing I am, right? Independent of everything else. What you'll always find is a relationship. And he says that existentially, the way he talks about it is that we're in one of two relations. We're either relating to the world in these relations as an I it, or relating to it as an I thou. And to make that distinction, the way he talks about it is, when I relate to something as an it, I'm relating to it as a means to my own end, right? So like, it's kind of like if I'm relating to my pencil, I'm relating to it as a means to the end of writing, right? Or this works really good with objects and functionality, but we can also relate to people as its, right? And in some contexts, this is really probably you want to do that, right? Like in order to solve certain problems in your company and stuff like that, you have to kind of look at your employees, right, from an objective standpoint. And there's nothing wrong with looking at the world as a means to an end. However, what I think Buber points out is that what's become rarer and rarer is this other side of the spectrum, which is where we can relate to the world and these relations from a place of I thou. And so to relate with something as a thou is to relate with it as an ultimate end in itself, right? In other words, right, seeing you as not is not something as a means to an end, but as an end in yourself, right, of something of ultimate value, right? And I would say that you could say circling, right, is in some sense a participatory practice or meditation or yoga that's really about cultivating that capacity to really be with the other and with ourselves, right, as a thou, right, to practice that, to attune with that, to comport oneself in that way such that the world can show up that way in practice with another person. And I think you're right, going back to your question about this way where people that we put kind of we label as like uh like in terms of a pathology or a problem, right? Like things with addiction, right? Different kinds of mental disorders, things like that. And I think what I heard you say was, well, in some sense, really at a deeper level, like we may actually, in a different context, those people would show up as the sage, right? They'd show up as the most wise one, right? And there is a sense what there is seems to be something about like especially in addiction that it seems like underneath the addiction, underneath the behavior is something like a spiritual craving, right? And my dad, who's been sober for, I don't know, 40 years or something like that, right? And has been really involved in Alcoholics Anonymous and such things. He talks about it as is that the guy, Gandhi standing in front of 1,000 people, right, talking about being or whatever, and the guy in the back, smoking crack in the back alley they have the same yearning. It just one's at the wrong address, right, in some sense. And so I think I appreciated what you said is that like if you shift your attention with that person, you can start to feel that the impulse itself is for something that is at another level can be really, really profound. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, uh, the crack specifically as a drug, I've heard it said that it's in a way, a very spiritual drug because it helps a person free themselves of all their worldly possessions. Just like Gandhi or an ascetic, person who, before long you find you've traded everything you have for the drug, and then it's just you, and eventually you don't have access to the drug, and I mean it's not a pleasant place to be, but
Yeah.
then again, that's hopefully for people at that end of the road, that's the beginning of them finding a spiritual connection and hopefully getting
Yeah.
into recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And what is it that um just for some context, like what is it that has you interested in this and seeing these kinds of things, and what is it in you that has you interested in circling and noticing it, and things kind of shining forth to you about it, like, and doing this podcast and what you're up to, what
It's to some degree, I mean, well, starting the podcast was just kind of agreeing to something that I was terrified to do. Someone came along, and this was like 3.5 years ago, I think. I was chatting with some people online, and we were agreeing and disagreeing about some things. And one guy said, "Why don't you do a podcast? Join our network." And I'm like, that's like the last thing I would ever do. Of anything, I hate I hate talking. I hate seeing myself on video. But then I remembered one thing that throughout school that they always told me that I was good at was I'm good at coming up with questions. And I don't know if I'm always good at that, but people always said like, I love your questions, and we want to hear what question you have. So that maybe I could possibly be good at podcasting. But the thing that the reason I do it now is that it's kind of an exploration to try to help people to find answers for myself and for other people. I mean, it's also a great excuse to have a conversation with someone and to meet new people. But like right now, I'm working with a population of people that are in a kind of a hopeless situation where there's almost no good solution for them. Specifically, not so much addiction, but drug dependence and protracted withdrawal. People that have come off of benzodiazepines mainly and other psych drugs, and they might have up to years of withdrawal symptoms, of struggling
Right.
through difficult times. And there's different things that might help them. Generally, no medication helps them. They can almost tolerate no medication. So the usual thing where they go to a doctor and the doctor writes them a prescription, that's just going to cause more problems in most cases. So
Mhm.
there's and they're usually at a point where, in the beginning at least, where therapy can't really help. They're not really ready to talk to anyone. And one of the biggest problems they have is that people don't believe that they're going through a real thing.
Hmm.
One thing is that they want to be heard. They want people to accept and acknowledge that this is real, what they're going through, and it is real. The benzodiazepines are toxic to the brain, and the long-term withdrawal effects can be severe. Not for everybody, but for a percentage, maybe 10-20%. For a very small percentage, it can be very difficult long-term. And
Yeah.
and just getting over that of just family members coming to you and saying, "Are you okay? Are you done with this yet?" People lose all their friends, and family members don't want to be around them. They don't feel
Yeah.
comfortable being a burden on people. And so it's a
Yeah.
very that especially, and so I put myself out there as someone that can they can come to. And
Hmm.
sometimes I feel like I don't know, what do I have to offer you. And I can listen, I can talk, I can tell you I know what you're going through is real. And there's some things that we can do to help. There's definitely some therapies, and knowing about these are the foods to avoid. Here's some medication that, well, I wouldn't normally recommend it, but it might help a little bit. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm kind of exploring, like looking for, what are the things that might help. And I just spoke to someone yesterday. We had a great interview about aromatherapy, which I just never even considered before. Just the idea of accessing the brain through the olfactory nerve, with very
Yeah.
safe but very effective sense. And that was really interesting. Circling stood out to me as something that
Yeah.
useful, and that people want to be recognized and
Yeah.
and taken seriously, and they're not making this thing up. And
Yeah.
I'm like, and that's kind of in a way the opposite of what they're getting now in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And it really does help just to be able to talk to someone who knows I know what you're going through is a real thing. And it's not a matter of me believing you or doubting you. We're beyond that. I just know that it's real. And
Yeah.
I'm willing to listen, and I want to know what I can do to help. And
Yeah.
like you're saying, people can be uh, the end of that we're here to talk and recognize each other, or you have tools. I mean, that's another thing. What are the tools we can put in our toolbox? And there's not a very good set of tools for dealing with some of these things. And so maybe
Yeah.
this is maybe circling is a tool, and not just another thing on the list. You always have a list of things, and it also stands out to me as something real, as opposed to, when you have someone saying, and not that I completely disbelieve it, but, people talk about energy healing at a distance and some of these
Mhm.
things. I'm like, well, I mean, I don't know if this person can really like send healing energy to you through the internet across the world. Maybe they can, maybe there's some universal connection there,
Yeah.
but like aromatherapy, that's real. I'm like, I know that odors have a powerful effect on memory and how people feel. Um, and I know that
Yeah.
listening to someone like what you're doing, recognizing them and honoring their, like you said, the infiniteness of who they are. I'm not sure if I'm putting it right, but what you were saying about that's something real, and it's something
Yeah.
I don't see very many people otherwise doing.
Right. Totally. It's funny because a couple of things. What I just want to appreciate what you said is like just this, you doing this podcast is in some sense that's what I heard you say is kind of like a spiritual practice for you of confronting what's most terrifying. So I just appreciate that big time.
Oh, thank you.
Um, and and then I'm also hearing your and now in what you're doing in terms of supporting people who are kind of going through these kinds of withdrawals, are you acting as like you're a physician, right? You're a doctor, I
Yeah.
think.
And in some
Yeah,
cases, we'll do consultations. I mean, that's what we call them, consultations, not really coaching. Coaching doesn't sound right,
yeah,
really. But I do also sessions where, and sometimes it's for family members, not always for the person suffering with the condition, but where no medical care is expected. And so
right.
it's me with my experience and knowledge and willingness to talk and listen. And a lot of it is listening. Sometimes you can talk to someone and I go in prepared to problem solve, because I love also, that's another thing. I'm also an amateur programmer. I love, in fact, just to go back to what you were saying when you're talking about all the different levels what was it, structure or function at different levels between different parts. I mean, it kind of sounded to me like, oh, that's object-oriented programming. We have objects and objects that have objects in them and bigger objects, and kind of that makes sense to me. But yeah, I'm a troubleshooter, love looking for
Mhm.
bugs and fixing them. And so I go into like some of these sessions and I'm like, I want to help you solve problems. I have a whole list of things that have helped other people, and I have that in front of me. I'm ready to go. And then I find
Yeah,
that before I have a chance to say anything, I start listening, and 3/4 of the session is just the person wants to talk and tell me what they've been through and what's going on. So yeah,
yeah,
listening is a big part of it.
totally. Yeah, totally. It's interesting too, because if you think about, just from a like a neurobiological level of what's going on in something like intimacy, right? Or fellowship or community, right? When those things are really present for us, you know, I think it's it's I mean, I am not a scientist, right? So I don't know the specifics of these, like the exact specifics of these kinds of things, but I know that like when somebody feels deeply connected, it activates serotonin system, like your serotonin system, it activates dopamine, it activates all these neurotransmitter neurotransmitters that are really real. I mean,
Yeah,
really, really real and really potent in a certain sense. And I think that makes a whole lot of sense, especially when you consider what, you know, how we all start as infants, right? It's human beings are really, really interesting when you think about, especially when you think about like how we start off, right? In some sense, a human infant, as far as I can tell, at least from my observation, I don't know if there's anything more vulnerable and dependent, right, than a human infant, than any other organism that we know about. Like, I mean, literally, like we all start off, we're almost all pure potentiality with very little actuality, right? We can maybe latch on to the nipple if we're lucky. So we start in this incredible vulnerability. Yet what's interesting is if you look at who's on top of the food chain, right? Who's the ones that are thinking about going to Mars, right? Who's the one that kind of can kind of know that we know in some respects. And so there seems to be this really paradoxical, profound relationship between vulnerability and our ability. And it strikes me as the difference that makes that difference, right? In terms of that vulnerability turning in and realizing what it potentiates, right? Has to do with relationship. And
yeah,
so it's kind of like from day one, I was talking before we started recording. I had mentioned, I'm re-immersed in this because I've just had my second child 16 months ago. So I'm in the midst of babyland, right? And he's just learning how to talk and read the alphabet and all those kinds of things. And I'm so present to just how much his development is completely almost a one-to-one relationship with how deeply he's related to, how deeply he's held, how deeply he's attended to, and how attuned our attunement as his caregivers are, right, is to the degree that that's really good, or to the degree that breaks down, is so determinate of who it is that he becomes. So relationship seems to be this. I don't know if there's anything more impactful and determinate and influential on us than the way that we're related to and the way that we relate, right? Than for us, because there is just a fundamental vulnerability. However, if the hold, like if there's a good enough holding environment, to use kind of the language of Wincott, right? And that goes well, it's the difference between somebody who can, who can be extraordinary, right? And or not. And so in some sense, circling is, you could say, is makes a practice, it's a practice of that, of how to relate profoundly in that way. And one of the things that I have learned over the years, right, about circling, and if we backed up just a little bit and looked at it from kind of like, well, why did like circling, this thing that just started with me and my friends, within a few years ended up spreading all over the world? It literally did that. And that's always, and I've always wondered about what does that say, right? About, does that say something about the practice of circling? Does that say something about the world? And I think it's both. However, it took me a while to start to realize this, but we started circling somewhere like right around 1998, which is right in the beginning of it was right in the middle, basically, of the .com, the .com thing in San Francisco. And one of the things I started to kind of see, right, over time, is like asking the question is like, well, why are people responding to this so deeply, right? It's spreading at a level that kind of goes beyond the personalities involved, right? It has an emergent quality. And I always tried to understand that in terms of that there must be something about the practice of circling. And I think what it is about the practice is that it's a rare thing. Circling is a rare thing as a practice, in that it takes just the fundamental unit of relation, the I thou relation, and makes it a yoga, right? So sometimes the way I describe it is like, it's something like, if you think about all of the deep conversations that you've had, right? Deep, profound conversations that you've had, or interactions or relationships that have been, like transformative for you, or profound philosophical, insightful conversations, or deeply intimate conversations that have had, like a developmental or a transformational impact on you. And if you took all of those and you abstracted out the through line of all those interactions and relationships and conversations, and you took that and you made that into a yoga, or into asanas or postures. So like, postures of communication, postures of listening, postures of attention and ways of being. And you got together and you just, with a group of people, and you just went deep into those asanas and practicing those asanas. You could say that's what circling is, right? Is practicing, the yoga of intimacy, or the yoga of connection. But the question is why did that speak to people so deeply, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's something that's happened that the internet has magnified, right? That shows a change in communication that's been profound, that I don't hear a whole lot of people talking about. And it's internet, like, if you think about it socially, the internet has really magnified this ability to uncouple, right, information exchange or informational connection from relationship. So,
Yeah.
like, let's say before the answering machine, right? If you and I wanted to have the back and forth, just the most simplest information exchange, we would at least have to talk on the phone. We'd
Yeah.
have to do this kind of awkward, strange thing called talking, right? That's filled with
Yeah.
ambiguity. It's filled with like, you know, powerful possibilities, positive possibilities, but also filled with potentials to deeply hurt us, right? If you think about all that's possible and just the simplest facing interaction between two people, I mean, it's so much when you really think about it. Up until the answering machine, essentially you couldn't really uncollapse this exchange, right, from relationship. You had to relate if you wanted to talk with somebody or exchange information. And then starting with the answering machine, and then email, and then texting, and then all the social media things, all of a sudden for the first time you've in a profound way have been able to uncouple that to where you and I can exchange information without having to do the hard thing called relating. And
Yeah.
because our nervous system is just inclined to move towards the path of least resistance, right? We're just going to naturally, now that we have this choice, we could naturally just move towards like texting instead, or sending an email instead, or right.
Yeah.
And it's in that ability has multiplied to the point where I think for the first time in history, all you basically need is an internet connection, and someone can become famous. They can have a billion, right, a billion friends.
Yeah.
They can start a company. They can become a millionaire, right? They can have all the accoutrements of a profound life, if you will, without ever having to actually address another human being. I mean, that's possible now.
Yeah.
So seeing that and coming to see that, I'm realizing like, oh, I think circling happened to be this relational practice, right? That emerged in a time where there's starting to be a kind of shortage or a famine, or where life doesn't necessitate so many conversations and interactions. And circling just happened to be there as the consequences of that structural change, right, took place. And that's why now I'm starting to realize that that's actually why circling has spread throughout the world, or a
Yeah.
big part of it, right, in that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, when you're talking about people texting and doing that asynchronous type communication,
Yep.
it's kind of ridiculous when people start voice dictating a text to another person and they voice dictate a text back. It's like you're
Yeah,
talking to the thing to send a text when you could be talking directly to each other at the same time.
totally. And especially and whenever you change any part of communication, it changes everything, right? Just think
Yeah.
about, when we went from an oral culture to literacy, right? That profoundly changed everything, right? The printing press was another huge change. And so I think we're in a time right now where we're starting to that it's like I don't think that we understand the consequences of that shift.
Yeah.
But some would say that, the all of the some of the things that you're talking about, right, with the psychiatric medications, that, I think some people would say that, with the advent of the internet and all of that, of linking this loss of mental health, right, and depression and schizophrenia and all those kinds of conditions to, tracking it to the growth of the internet, there seems to be a profound connection between the two.
Yeah.
And so when you think about like, well, how is it that you become who you are, right? Well, you become who you are in and through these interactions, in and through these relationships, right? That's how we
Yeah.
literally come into being as another human being, is through relationship. And it was like that from the moment of our birth. And I think that continues to be the case as we develop into adulthood. I don't think that ever stops being the case in a big way. So when you talk about, people who are really going through various levels of hell with their withdrawal of their medications, right, and these intense experience, right, intense experiences, I can imagine that in some respects, maybe the reason why they even needed the medication in the first place, right, is out of this depravity of contact, of genuine connection with other people, right? And
Yeah.
so coming through this withdrawal and like having a hard time, and then reaching out to you, and then just being able to be in contact with you and experience the back and forth of being seen and understood and heard, right, in some sense becomes so, although it doesn't necessarily like heal their ailment, right, that genuine reciprocity, right, and care profoundly, profoundly can transform our relationship to whatever it is that we're going through in a big way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when a person gets started on some of these medications, they may go to a psychiatrist, and they might expect to have a long conversation, or even lay on a couch and have the psychiatrist up by their head taking notes while they talk about their mother and their childhood. And that's not how psychiatry visits have gone for a very long time. Usually
Mhm.
when a person, and I'm sure it's still the same way, but when a person goes to see a psychiatrist, um, it can be quick 5-minute visit where the psychiatrist says, based on the form you filled out in the waiting room while you're waiting to see me, I've looked it over and decided that you have um, the following disorders, and they're treated by the following medications. And so the person,
Yes.
before they have a chance to think, they were expecting some kind of an interaction of therapy, going into, what traumas occurred in their lifetime. And they walk out with a set of medications, and then they take them and they go back the next month, and the psychiatrist says, well, how do you feel? Do you have less anxiety, less depression? I'm not having the anxiety because I take this pill every time I feel anxious, and this other one has kind of made me not feel very good or very bad. I'm kind of in the middle now. And he's like, okay, good, it's working, let's keep going with that. And that can go
Yeah.
on for decades for some people. um
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, yeah, I can see that being the thing, person, and then there's also the thing of, of I guess, like, communication trauma or whatever, like a person has had, maybe they identified as the black sheep of the family, and they felt beat up on by everybody.
Yeah.
And, and they get to a point where they just want to avoid confrontation and avoid people. And, I mean, do you see a lot of that, of people coming to circling who have had really difficult upbringings with family?
Oh God. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I've seen, yeah. And from all spectrums and all degrees of from super, healthy environments to like the most like devastating kinds of environments that I could imagine. I've heard so many, been with people, and been frankly just profoundly amazed at the kinds of you know people who had childhoods that were just so distraught, and right, dealing with just outright malevolence towards them, and the trauma of all that. And given all that, there's still this person who's fundamentally wants to get better, right? Or you could sense there is still a goodness in them that you can't explain, right, deterministically based on their history. Their history would say something like, God, if it probably would make more sense if they're you know um not seeking help, but like causing hell in their life and self-destructing and destroying other people's lives, right? And that people can, through living through all of that, still come to want to be have a sense of goodness, right? And want to address themselves. It's just like, when I see that, I'm always so impressed and amazed, right, by what's possible with human beings, right? um but yeah, I think that it seems to me that most of I mean, most of our problems, right, like most of the areas that we struggle in, right, are a function of where relationships have broken down historically. Yeah. Um, so it's where we haven't felt seen, or where we've been misinterpreted, right? Or there's been a need that we had when we were a kid, and instead of it being addressed, we end up with having to deal with our parents' anxieties or something like that. Like the the amount of how complicatedly bad, right, relationships can go, and how deeply that can affect us is just huge. Um, and it also makes sense that, from that standpoint, moving toward in and through towards relationality to address those things and to heal it makes a lot of sense to me, right? Like, if the problem has to do with this, it like originated in these like core relationships from when you were a kid, like like moving, healing it or addressing it through relating differently and having like more open I thou relationships just makes sense to me intuitively, right? That, and logically, that having those relationships and deepening those relationships and having those kinds of bonds in your lives would be the resolution of a lot of those problems, big time. And I've definitely seen that.
Yeah.
One of the things that we take care to emphasize is that, it's a paradox, because encircling, what we aren't, it's not therapy, right?
Mm.
We're not trying to heal anything or fix anything or solve any problems. What we're doing is we're just practicing, right, the principles of being deeply connected and deeply related, and all the things that we can do in relationship to that. And which is, in circling, we talk about that as it's just the intention to profoundly be with what is, right? Like, that's the whole, when we sit down and we that's the first thing that we talk about when we start a circle and we practice, is like, the first thing we say is that what we're doing here, our sole intention is to practice profoundly being with what is, right? And the paradox of it is that through being that way, right, people experience have this experience oftentimes of healing, right, of resolving all kinds of issues that happen for them. Lots of people talk about those, that just by being in that environment is inherently therapeutic in a big way.
Yeah.
There's a paradox there I've always found really interesting.
The thing about that's really interesting to me is that I spoke to a psychiatrist recently, and I've had a few psychiatrists on the podcast, and I asked her, and the other ones I've talked to were very much involved in treatment with medication, and one had given me the justification for why psychiatrists these days can't really afford to give people the time that they need. But this other psychiatrist I spoke to, she has a practice where she gives people the time and she doesn't prescribe medication. She actually helps people get off of medications. And so I thought, well, I finally found someone I can ask the question of, because I was always asking this question, like, what exactly is therapy? What happens in therapy? When you do therapy, what conversations do you have? What techniques are you doing? Like, what exactly is, do you talk about their childhood? Do you give them tools? Do you give them things to do? And what she told me was interesting. She said that there's been studies showing that it doesn't matter what you do. The point of talk therapy is talk, that the talking itself is what gets the result. And you could do all kinds of techniques of therapy, but what the person really needs is a conversation for a period of time. And so I can imagine what you're doing. The result could be as or more therapeutic than any kind of formal therapy.
Yeah, yeah. And perhaps what I'm hearing is, perhaps the therapy, it's like, well, what's happening in and through the talking, right, is a relationship is being formed, right?
Yeah.
And if that relationship is open and compassionate, right, and real, like, it's not, this is one of the things I want to also kind of emphasize too, is I can imagine somebody listening to this and thinking that, like, oh, this is really about like uh, like a Pollyannish kind of positivity or something, right?
Yeah,
And in reality, no, it's about really being real. And so
yeah.
it's not like we're just shining a smile at things. No, we're actually looking at them and relating to them profoundly and openly. And that can be, you talked about, in some sense, I heard you say talk about that in starting a podcast, right? You're it's like the last on one level, it's the last thing that you want to do is get on, right? Is
Yeah.
publicly have conversations with people. There's something terrifying about that. But you just turning towards that and practicing facing that, right, is probably led to, I would imagine, has opened things up
Oh,
in
yeah.
possibilities
Yeah.
you couldn't have ever foreseen.
Yeah, that's I mean, not just podcasting in general, but also agreeing to do episodes interviewing certain people. Some of the people have just terrified me. I'm like, why are they even agreeing to talk to me? And I can't possibly hold a conversation with that person. And then it turns into and it turns out to be fine and it's an incredible conversation. And other things it reminds me, I guess there's been a couple of books where people, I think there was that book called The Year of Yes, where the woman that director, she said she just said yes to everything, and not that you want to say, not that a person should say yes to everything in the world, but it was also in one of Michael Singer's books where I forgot which one, but one of them where he said he for a lot of his life he pretty much just said yes to whatever came along, and some things that he didn't especially want to do, but he felt that God or the universe had brought these things to him, and it was his place to say yes and accept what it was. I think it was the one where he talked about building, getting into construction. He was building wood houses with his hands, and people came along and they said, we want houses built, and somebody wanted him to write a program. He wrote a program for them. He learned how to do that. People wanted to meditate with him. He brought them in to meditate with him, even when it wasn't something he wanted to do. He pretty much said yes to everything, and all these incredible things happened throughout his life that all turned out good. So yeah, the podcasting was kind of like that. It was I'm like, I know I should say yes to it, even though I don't want to. It would be easier just
Yeah.
to say no and continue with my regular thing. And blogging was the same thing. I really didn't want to put myself out there writing articles. I'm like, the first thing I'm going to write something and everyone's going to tear it apart. They're going to say, oh, look, the doctor wrote an article. Let's go through piece by piece and show where he's wrong. And
Right.
the way I got past it at first was I convinced myself nobody's reading anyway. I can put out a ton of articles, and then later I came to the conclusion, well, what if I say something wrong? That's going to start a conversation. Someone will say like, oh, you're wrong here. I'm like, well, okay, either I'm wrong or I'm not. But if I am, okay, I'll fix it, or let's talk about it. Let's see why
Yeah.
we disagree. And
Yeah.
so there's it was definitely a good thing. Um, and it's important to, that was important for me. Now that's become a major thing about what I do. That's actually become a new job for me, because I kind of wanted to move beyond healthcare and not have that to be the only thing that I do. And I've actually started to write for other people and write professionally a little bit. And
Wow.
I never in my life, if you told me in school, like, you're going to be a writer someday, I'm like, I can't even write a paper, and when I do, I get like a C or on it or something. I'm a terrible writer. I picked my major in college to be the only major where I didn't have to write a paper at the end. Um,
Yeah. Right.
I mean, if you told me now, like, you have to write a 10-page paper, I
Yeah.
probably could have it done by tomorrow. But if you told me that in college, I'd be like, that's never going to happen.
Totally. So this is, I think, it sounds like that just saying yes to podcasting and turning towards the thing that was kind of scary and saying yes to writing and turning towards the thing that was kind of scary. I think what I'm hearing you say is led to, not only has it opened up possibilities that you get to participate in now, but like it sounds like it's those things have significantly transformed you, had you developed more in ways that maybe you weren't even imagining were possible. Does that feel
Oh,
true?
definitely. Yeah. And it makes me
Yeah.
wonder, what other things are out there? What if I said no to before that maybe I shouldn't have? And
Yeah.
what new things might come along today that I need to be
Yeah.
careful not to right away say no to it.
Yeah. That's really cool, because what I just heard you just do right there, I think, was now you have this relationship called the domain of the unknown, right? That I could say
Yeah,
yes to, right? That you can now see, and then look back at your life and go and see things in terms of places that you could have said yes where you've said no to, right? So it sounds like there's this it's transformed or made more explicitly something like the domain of the domain of the unknown itself, right? And it's become something that's I think what I'm hearing through the way you're talking about it is that the unknown is in some sense has actually become something attractive to you.
yeah, yeah. And I think, when people talk about opportunity,
That strikes me as quite a big difference, right? That's a big shift,
oh yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I
That's a
mean,
big shift.
yeah, and I mean, it's one thing to jump into, when people talk about taking a risk or jumping into the unknown where you don't know what the outcome's going to be, doing something dangerous or risky or new. Um, I mean, yeah, I think I used to be like that a lot more when I was younger. So maybe I had like a long stretch of 2 or 3 decades where I was playing things safe more. But
Yeah, yeah.
and I like to think about that monkey trap story I read somewhere. Like you ever hear that the monkey, these hunters are trying to capture monkeys, so they put some food in a hole in a tree, and the chimp or whatever kind of monkey comes along, and he reaches in, he tries to grab the food, and he gets a big handful of food in his hand, and now his hand can't fit out of the hole anymore. And the hunters come along, and the monkey's stuck there. He can't get his hand out. He's like trapped. And they just pick him up and throw him in a cage. And all he had to do was let go of the food and walk
Yeah,
away. Um,
yeah.
and I think a
Yeah.
lot of us are stuck in that trap of like, maybe
Totally.
working at a job, making a salary, and you're like, everything is really good now. If I walk away from this and do something different,
Yeah,
how can any good come from that? But
yeah,
that's it. You just got to let go and walk away, or and
yeah.
get out of the trap.
And that letting go and walking away, right, puts you in this place that's it. Well, one, it's what I'm hearing. I think what I'm getting is it's immediately putting you in the domain of the unknown,
Yeah,
right? And that's depending on how you relate to that, right, seems to determine or make more likely whether or not that domain is something that you kind of um, live in order to not experience, right, or avoid, or a place that you can step into. And if you step into it, it becomes this zone, what they call I think in cognitive science, the zone of proximal development, like the ideal place, right, where it's an edge, right, where you're opening up to something that's needing something more than you currently understand to be able to relate to or how to deal with, right? However, it's it's enough such that facing it you can learn about it, right, and open up to that domain and develop yourself the zone of proximal development in that edge. And what's interesting about this is kind of tying that back into why I think relationship, real, genuine, authentic relationship is so important for us, because in some sense, you know, intimacy, the the system thinkers talk about family systems thinking talks about intimacy in a way that I really like, which is they talk about intimacy as a function of the ability to tolerate anxiety, right? Like, and the way that they would talk about it, and it's kind of getting at this kind of zone of proximal development in a certain sense, right? And it makes sense why in order to be intimate you have to tolerate anxiety, because essentially the way they talk about it is that human beings have the two fundamental drives, right, that comes with existing, right, with being a human being. So we have this deep longing for closeness and the security and the comfort that comes and the belonging that comes with that closeness. And at the same time, we have has as deep of a drive for autonomy, right? To stand on our own, to be unique, right?
yeah,
And to be autonomous. And so when you go into relationships, you end up, and they talk about it, it's like if you if you conceptualize yourself as a bullseye, right, as a concentric, right, rings into the center, and the other person is a bullseye. And then as you come close to the other person, you hit these levels, right, of closeness. And that when you hit and when you come up to a certain level of closeness, it's where those points come up where it looks like what I want or to be who I am, it looks like it may risk being close with you, right?
Yeah.
And so you get into these, it can become really anxious, right? And there's three ways that they talk about that you move away from anxiety and thus move away from intimacy. Is that you move away from it from like one way is just to dissociate, right? Of like rather than say your truth and risk, right, and risk the relationship in a certain sense, instead you'll just dissociate. And the other way is you'll dominate, right? You'll just take over the situation, right? And I'll never even open up to what that you may be other than me or want something different, right? And
Yeah.
so we'll dominate as a way of moving away from that anxiety. Or we submit and we just say, well, I'll just do whatever you want, right? And that's another way of moving away from the anxiety. And then they say, or actually move towards the fear and the anxiety and actually say what you want and open to what the other person wants, right? Are these moments of tolerating that anxiety that break open to become something that you break into a domain where something becomes possible that you couldn't foresee, right?
Yeah.
And I think having relationships in your life, right, if those relationships are deepening, right, constantly bring up those occasions of that zone of proximal development that continually keeps us on our edge in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I was speaking of that, I'm thinking about all the things that you're saying, and that when people come together and and relate to each other, there's a lot of expectations, and I was thinking of, like, suppose that someone maybe someone in recovery from addiction, just for an example, um, they're home alone, they're watching TV, and trying, and they want to get up and get out of the house because they know that it's not good to be alone with themselves. They want to be around other people, and they could go to the mall and be around people that they don't interact with at all, or they could go to, because they're in recovery, they could go to AA or NA, one of the 12-step groups, where someone will talk and then they'll have a chance to raise their hand and talk, and it kind of follows a closed script of what's allowable in a 12-step meeting to talk about. Or they could go to one of the newer kind of meetings. There's Smart Recovery, which I've heard great things about. It's very similar, but without the 12 steps. But now suppose the person is looking through all the list of things they can find in their community, and they see circling. There's a circling group. And they're like, decide, I don't know what that is. I'm going to take a chance and go there. They show up at the right time. They walk in the door. What can they expect? This person, maybe they're looking to make friends, to meet people like them. They don't know exactly what's going to happen. All they know is that there's people in there, and they're going to have a chance to interact with people. What happens from there?
Totally. Well, one of the things that I can just describe what we do in our opening every Thursday night from 6 to 9 Pacific Standard Time. We have an open event where just anybody can come, and we circle together for 3 hours. And how we start off is we start off with just a little a centering meditation. And then we go over a set of agreements that we kind of articulate that kind of lay the ground rules for what we're going to be doing that night. And then we go right into some kind of relational practice, right? Some kind of thing where we break, because it's all on Zoom. So they'll break out into partners, right? 1 or 2 people, or 3 people. And there'll be some exercise that is about, like, essentially being with this person and maybe just saying what you notice, right? What you feel being with this person. And then the other person says, hearing that, I notice I'm feeling, right? And then the person says, hearing that, now I'm noticing. Or different exercises that involve like following your curiosity and asking questions. These, all the different things, all the different kind of, you could say, dribble drills or ways of taking a piece of relating and creating a constraint around it and then just going deep in that practice. We'll do that for like a half an hour to 45 minutes, right? And then we'll come back into the main room and people will talk about their experience of that, right? And relate about that. Then after a small break, then we'll come back and we'll start the, we'll break up into groups of anywhere between 4 to 6 people. And there'll be a leader for each one of those groups. And then we'll go into the practice of circling, right? And with that, and what the form that we do on Thursday nights is circling, is where one person chooses to be the center of attention, right? And we all bring our attention to that person and to ourselves. And then that person usually starts talking about something important to them, right? Something going on in their life. Could be something that they really, that's really singing for them, right? In a positive way. It could be something that they're really struggling with. And then we all start to deeply relate with that person and share what it's like for us being with them, right? What we're getting, what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, and hearing them talk about their lives. And also what we're hearing them say, right? And the deeper levels of what we're seeing, right? Which that dynamic opens, oftentimes it has the experience for the person being circled of really opening up to more of themselves, to show more of themselves, right? Which invites everyone else to take a deeper look and an experience that opens the listener up. And there's this, you could say what starts to happen is this mutual, you could say autopoetic reciprocal self-opening, right? Starts to take hold, where there's an accelerating, John Vervaeke calls it, he's got awesome vocabulary. He calls it about it like an accelerating, a reciprocal accelerating sense of self-disclosure, right? So everyone starts to have a deeper level of basically revealing themselves more, and in revealing themselves more, right, inviting you to reveal yourself more, right, which invites me to reveal yourselves more. So that happens at a personal level, but as you keep doing that, you start to actually, what starts to get disclosed is like not just what's going on personally, but you start to get in contact with these more universal things, right? You start to feel this sense of being itself become something that is disclosed and opens up, or love itself, right? These kind of platonic universal senses of things can start to be felt and experienced and talked about and realized in and through the circling. And we do that for we do usually a couple of circles. So we do that for a couple of hours total. And then we come back and then we all sit and kind of check in about what that experience was like for us. Right. And then we talk about the different ways, the different things that we do at the Circling Institute and ways to go deeper with the practice. Okay. And so you can imagine somebody walking out of that, right?
Yeah.
kind of just, they haven't even left their house, right? And then going and having that experience, you can imagine the different universe they're living in, right? Before and after that. It's pretty profound.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And what about in person? I mean, is there what opportunities does a person have to do this in person and actually in the same room with other people?
Right. Well, right now, it's funny because it used to all be in person. And for the last 25 years, I've been doing everything in person in the Bay Area. And then COVID hit, and then everything went online. And so we did our stuff online, and it completely worked online in a way that was a bit daunting to see how well it worked online, because I'm kind of, I was a little bit set in my ways about like it had to be done in person, but it doesn't have to be done in person. So we are now, with the restrictions being lifted, we're just getting our feet back in the water about
Yeah.
how we're going to unfold things in person, but there's nothing available right now.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot that. I mean, I'm in Florida, so I mean, California and Florida are like different situations with COVID and everything.
Yeah.
So are you in San Francisco right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, yeah, we went on a vacation there a few years ago, and it was the most fun vacation for the kids. They loved it there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The Bay Area is awesome. It's awesome. There's so much happening here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we stayed in an Airbnb on the beach, and the beach was beautiful. I mean, it's really cold and different, definitely different from the beaches here. I mean, just like
Yeah.
something out of a painting. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, it's
What did you go? Were you mean like Ocean Beach in San Francisco?
oh, I don't know how
Or
to.
was it more further south?
I know there was a train, like was it a Judah something street? It was a train that circled around at the end. Like it came to like the end of the train
Right.
line was right where we were, right by the house we were staying, and it would circle around and go back again. Um,
Right.
but I don't remember. And I remember there was a restaurant. Oh, this good place where we were. If you there was a windmill, and you go up a hill, and there's a restaurant on top of the hill, and then right
Oh
there
yeah.
there's a bathhouse thing that from like the early 1900s that there's remnants of
Yeah.
it there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's in the, yeah, that's right in San Francisco. It's right around Ocean Beach.
Okay, yeah, it was beautiful, and then it wasn't too hard. At first, we were determined to use public transportation, and then we finally gave in and rented a car. We only meant to rent it for a day. We used some kind of a car rental service where you find the car on the street in front of someone's apartment, and they activate it remotely, and you just get in and drive it away. And so we did it for 24 hours, and then we found we could extend it. So we just kept the car and just drove around everywhere. And we got to go
Hmm.
visit one of my favorite podcasters, Leo Laporte. Drove up north to a studio, and
Hmm.
they let us come in and watch his main Sunday night podcast for like 3 hours, and that was a lot of fun, like to do
That's
that.
great.
And yeah, it was a great trip. We walked the Golden Gate Bridge, and
Mhm.
but yeah, I can imagine it must be a great place to live and work, and
Yeah. Yeah. It
yeah,
has been for me.
definitely.
It has been for me for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely a good place to visit. And then lately we visited Brooklyn. We walked the Brooklyn Bridge, which is kind of a similar experience. That's fun. And
Yeah. Yeah.
another totally opposite end of the side of the country, but also kind of similar in some ways. Just like he was looking for a good bakery, good coffee, a
Yeah.
fancy historical bridge to walk.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Totally. That's gorgeous. Yeah. Yeah. I love Brooklyn. I love being in New York. I don't know if I have I'd be able to tolerate like living there like all the time, but touching into New York is just, there's something going on there that's not going on anywhere else in the world for
Oh
sure.
yeah, yeah, definitely. But I would agree. I mean, it gets stressful after a while, and just being out, there's just so much out going on. I mean, yeah, like I kind of like the quiet cleanliness of where we live. It's very quiet here. It's not no garbage on the streets, not a lot of noise.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely fun to go visit because I have family there. My sister lives there, and we've been going to visit recently. We've been there a few times the past
Oh,
year.
nice.
Um,
Nice.
yeah, so yeah, as far as the circling, where can someone find out more about it? Like if someone is listening and they're really intrigued and they want to get involved, what's the next step for them?
Just go to www.circlinginstitute.com. So Circling Institute, all one word.com. And then all the links for all the different things that we have going on are there. We have like I talked about, the Thursday night it happens every week, from 6 to 9 p.m. on Thursday evenings. That's been happening every Thursday for years now. We also do intensive weekends. Um, we have one, I think we just did one, so I think we have another one coming up in about 5 or 6 weeks. And then we also have the Art of Circling program, which is a year-long training in the art of being able to facilitate circling. And we have there's a bunch of different levels after that, but those are the main things that are kind of, if people are interested, those are all the things that ways they can jump in and participate. There's also, if you go online, we have we've written a bunch of like blog posts about different aspects of circling. And then I have a my own channel. It's called Circling Dialogos, or if you just look up Guy Sengstock,
Okay.
it's the emphasis what I talk about on the channel, it of course involves a lot of circling just by virtue of that's kind of my history. However, that channel has really turned out to be something more of the work that I'm doing with John Vervaeke and Christopher, called Dialogos, which is really a whole ecology of practices that's kind of bringing the intimacy of circling right into philosophical ideas and the world of meaning and those kinds of conversations. And so that's kind of the emphasis on my channel, but you can find all kinds of stuff there of just really wild, insightful, deep, everything from like personally deep and intimate to like deep and profound in the philosophical, insightful sense of the word as well. That's all on my channel.
Oh, great, great. And the Thursday night thing, is there like a capacity? Like, can you take, I mean, I would imagine a lot of people get involved with that. Is that something that's open, like anyone, they want to try it this coming Thursday, that there's probably
Yeah.
availability?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, you can just go online and you can just I think it's $20. So it's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
And anybody can come. You can come this Thursday for sure.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think I'm gonna see, if my if nothing going on with the family, I'm gonna be there, and I definitely recommend it. Definitely recommend. Oh, there's one video that I found on YouTube. Like, do you recommend, or do you have on your website, do you host videos of like examples? There's one incredible video of you demonstrating circling, but do you have a lot of
Yeah.
like other videos of that?
Of me of circle demonstrations of circling, no. In fact, the one that you saw is really rare, because we actually had somebody just come and film me demoing a circle for the Art of Circling, right, a number of years ago, and it actually was able to capture it, I thought, quite well.
Yeah.
But being able to capture circling on video and stuff like that it usually doesn't come across really that you don't really
Yeah.
get a sense of on video, but that one you do. And
Yeah.
that's on my YouTube channel. You can find it. It's like the one that's featured when you
Yeah.
go to my channel.
Yeah.
It's the one that's actually featured there.
Okay, so the best way a person can really get to know what it's about is to start, probably show up Thursday night.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I want to encourage everybody to come to Thursday night. Yeah, it's like it doesn't take much. You just show up and bring your presents, and you'll get it. You'll get the first taste of what's possible with circling. Yeah, and if you want to go deeper, there's all different kinds of ways you can go deeper with it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just right there, you just gave me a new resource that I can talk. When I talk to patients, I can say, "Here's something you can do." You can
Totally.
go to do this on Wednesday night, and now you have a Thursday night thing to do.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's perfect. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Doc. Thank you for joining me today on the podcast.
It's been so nice getting to know you a bit. I look forward to more.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.